What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime. We're all chuckling because Joe Jacklone, as we're going on, asked how his hair looks. It looks fantastic. Those eyebrows look beautiful, Joe. Appreciate it. It's been more than 2 weeks. On a serious note, since Maryland mom of 5, Rachel Morin's body was found near a trail where she went missing on August 5th. Her body found August 6th. Authorities now say they have a suspect in Rachel Morin's violent homicide. The catch is they don't have a name to put with a face. So what's law enforcement going to do now? They also don't know where this face is. They don't know where this person is. Best guess. So happy to welcome Detective Debbie Ramsey. She is retired, but she began her law enforcement career, you'd never know by looking at her, in 1982 with the Baltimore Police Department in Maryland. She served there for 12 years. She rose through the ranks and became a community policing officer, a patrol officer, and detective. And as a detective, she worked with the Criminal Investigation Drug Enforcement Section and the Internal Investigation Division. She served on several federal task forces along the FBI, the Maryland State Police, and she is now the founder and executive director of Unified Efforts Out-of-School Time Violence Prevention Program, which provides in-school activities and programs to children at no cost to their parents. Barbara Ray Venter, coming to us from California, where the storms just hit. She's okay. I have dubbed her the godmother of investigative genetic genealogy. She is born in New Zealand. She's a patent attorney, and she helped police crack the Joseph James D'Angelo case, otherwise known as the Golden State Killer. In 2019, she was included in the Time 100 list of most influential people, and in 2018 was recognized in Nature's 10, a list of people who, quote unquote, mattered in science by the journal Nature. She's the author of I Know Who You Are, How an Amateur DNA Sleuth Unmasked the Golden State Killer and Changed Crime Fighting Forever. There was a big profile in the New York Times revolving around Rex Heuermann, the accused Long Island serial killer, about how the face of the game has changed. And in large part, that is due to Barbara Ray Venter's work. So kudos to her. Last but certainly not least, Joe Jacklone, retired NYPD sergeant. He was a supervisor, the detective squad. He's an internationally recognized expert. He has an extensive background in criminal investigations and has held many prestigious positions in the NYPD. He's trained investigators from all over the world. 3-time guest speaker at CrimeCon. He's the author of The Criminal Investigative Function, a guide for new investigators. He deals in cold cases as well. So thank you to everybody. Quick reminder, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Instagram, I post pictures of my kids at Surviving the Survivor. Twitter, I shoot out showtimes at Podcast STS. We're also anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can support us on Patreon, YouTube. The merch store is open, and we did a fundraiser last night for Maui. We've got STS Nation Loves Maui shirts. If you buy them still, that money is going to go to the residents of Maui to try to help them through the worst wildfire disaster in over 100 years in the United States of America. Without further ado, let's get cracking here. Joe Jackalone, to you. You, even after retirement, you live, eat, and breathe this world on your own volition. You basically went down to the Monpont Trail in Maryland. Rachel Morin, they had a memorial walk. How did you even know about it? What was the experience like?
Well, I decided to take a ride down there, unbeknownst to me that they were going to have a ceremony that morning. So I kind of got a little surprised. It was a good surprise. But it was a very somber type of atmosphere, of course, as anyone would expect. But there was also some joy there too. There was music playing. They had people, talking about Rachel. It was kind of interesting to see it from the standby kind of eyewitness kind of thing. Usually from the law enforcement perspective, you're just standing there, watching the crowd, making sure that nothing happens. So it was actually interesting to be a participant for once. but I walked the entire trail, and as you can see in the video here, I was looking for places where one could escape, and I actually found a couple of them. One was actually pretty interesting because I went about the same distance that they said she was where the crime actually happened. Some say I should have gone a little further, but at this point, we really don't need to see the exact crime scene per se. We're looking at how this person could escape from it. But it was kind of interesting. I'm glad I went. I'm considering myself these days more of an advocate for family members. I try to help people as much as I can through the cold case process because, as you know, it's really difficult for the families dealing with law enforcement on certain angles. So I try to help in that respect, and that's what I wrote the new book too, the Cold Case Handbook, which goes about explaining to victims' families about how to go get police departments to look into these cases. It's really important.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to Joe about the mood there. If he thinks this could become a cold case, a lot of questions still to ask about this case. The biggest one is, where is this guy? Debbie Ramsey, to you, this part of Maryland is Bel Air. It's a well-to-do neighborhood about 30 miles north of Baltimore. I'm just wondering, closer to home where you are, is this being discussed on the local news? Is this something that people are talking about around the water cooler? It seems to, not have had the same amount of media traction as some people expected. I'm curious how it's impacted Baltimore, that area, if at all.
Well, some of the sensationalism has waned somewhat. And I always like to explain Baltimore area and the state of Maryland. Maryland's not a very large geographic, it doesn't have a large footprint. And we do not use the term suburbs, we use counties. And when we say Harford County, we understand that is like a suburb of that locale. So we have a colloquialism where we describe areas. And Harford County is north of Baltimore. And just by looking at the terrain, what struck me from the video is the trail itself. Now, I don't know if it's gravel or if it was paved or semi, but I would also like to know the weather conditions, because if it was dry, the way that video looked, you would hear footprints. And I have been on trails. And if I hear someone walking behind me, just, I guess, as my professional training, I would tend to stop and have that person pass by me. Or if the visibility was at its peak that day, whatever is in front of me, I can also observe by using all of my senses as well. So, but the other point I want to make very, very clear is that, especially for women, we tend to have having a habit, and we telegraph our habits. And let's just say if someone wanted to do some ill will towards her, and they know that every day at 4 o'clock or whatever, she's out in the trail and oftentimes alone. So who would know her habits? And oftentimes I would try to explain to people, one of the things they taught us in the academy was, even as police officers, do not go home the same way you always do. And at the moment, I felt like that made sense. And that's a habit I continue to use to this day. So I'm looking at this. What strikes me is that she may have telegraphed a habit. And if someone wanted to do her harm, the research would not have been that complicated. So we can't measure prevention, but I always like to make sure that we get this out, that we have to watch our routines, especially as women. The other point that I would like to make is what kind of relationships do you have? I know we always try to look at that significant other, but there could be other people who may have had a gripe with her. And I will look at her entire circle of friends and relatives, co-workers, what they thought of her. And I would start working as an investigator. I will work the case backwards. So those are things that stand out to me. Harford County is considered like a suburb, one of the counties in Baltimore. Number two, the trail itself. What are the composites? Was it raining that day? One would have heard footprints behind her? Was the visibility so low that you could not see in front of you? And another thing is, I don't understand how people who would care and love her would allow her to use that trail as often as she did alone. So those are things that pop out to me as an investigator.
And Debbie Ramsey makes good points about changing up the routine, and we can get back to the retired detective about that for all the women watching. We've got the tip line up here. It's an email, rmtips@hartfordsheriff.org. Now, the sheriff has come out and says he believes this is a random attack. Real quick, a shout out to Betty Deluxe, longtime viewer, first time live. Great to have you for first time live. Exquisite here. STS Nation rolling in. We've got Tali from Israel. Barbara Ray Venter, this is your wheelhouse. So police had a press conference and they announced that they have a CODIS hit from DNA, and we'll circle back to all this. A DNA hit in CODIS from a violent attack back on March 26th in Los Angeles. They just know that the DNA is a match, but they don't have a name, no identity on the suspect, which is why it's leading investigators to believe it was sort of a random attack. Obviously, Detective Ramsey is saying we still have to work the case backwards. Is this where you get called in now? And I'm not saying specifically for this case, but is it kind of at these points where you get called into the investigations, and what do you do?
So quite often, this is where I would get called in. It really depends on whether they have DNA of a sufficient amount that they can do investigative genetic genealogy, which would be the logical next step. They do have another hit, which is really good news. But as you're saying, they don't have a name to put with that face. So in order to get a name, that's where investigative genetic genealogy comes in.
Joe Jacklone, I have a million questions for you about the walk. But before we get there, this has come up a lot. We watched this press conference live on STS last Thursday night. And Exquisite says, saying that someone shut the door behind him in Los Angeles seems odd, talking about, so they have video of the suspect, but again, no name, no identity. And the COE, if we can run that video or at least put the stills up. Here's the video. Joe, let's watch this for a moment here. This is who authorities believe is a suspect, high and tight haircut. And then you see that hand shut the door. We'll watch it one more time. Looks like he's carrying a shirt, obviously shirtless. Joe Jackalone, a lot was made of that arm. Our investigators Thursday night said it is likely the sexual assault, the young sexual assault victim who is trying to coax this guy out the door without becoming, a homicide victim. What did you see when watching this?
Well, yeah, we're led to believe that the victim is about 9 years old, so I don't find that whole thing with the door unusual per se, right? So we have a scared kid who's just probably looking to just get any chance to get this guy out of the house. But if you watch this closely, I think there's something even more important there. Right there, you see that in his right pocket? That's a cell phone that it's on, right? He has that phone unlocked. Now here's where, we have a case now between, see it right there?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a case in LA and you have a case in Maryland, and you have the nexus for a federal investigation to come in and with all their toys and bringing in, and we're looking at maybe a geofence here for his cell phone data between this and see if they can match it up to Maryland. This is what I would be hoping for, and also triangulation and cell tower stuff. So this is where I think this investigation goes. There's what I refer to as the three forensic horsemen for investigations. You have cell phone records, internet records, and video surveillance. And I think you're going to have all three of them play a role in this case. And I think that's how they ultimately catch him. I mean, the U.S. Marshals, I wouldn't be a bit surprised getting involved in this for the hunt as soon as they identify him, because we don't know exactly who he is. All they say right now is a male, 5'9", Hispanic. That's basically the only description that they were able to give us. So there's a lot of work to be done. And this is where, like I said, Barbara and her crew would come in and take over in that respect. And hopefully maybe there's somebody in the system, or that somebody is a family member that lives here, because we know we have 2 states that he's maybe found some sort of family or friend relationship, which could be interesting.
And Detective Ramsey, just back to you. This case is now over 2 weeks old. She went missing August 5th. The body is found August 6th. And they believe it was random. So what would you be doing in terms of an investigation right now? You're working this case. I know you weren't homicide per se, but where would you be right now? Where would your head be? What would you be trying to figure out?
Yeah, even though I worked in drug enforcement section, oftentimes the drug enforcement and the homicide, they go hand in hand. So I do have experience working some homicide cases. And looking at this video, what struck me is that he's walking backwards out the door. There appears to be some type of salutations. There doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency of him exiting, or the person that armed is like shoving him away. So he felt comfortable backing up. There's some salutations going on right there. You can't see his lips move there, but there was some salutations going on right there. So that shows me familiarity. It doesn't show me a panic. I don't see anything panicking there or the urgency of having him leave. Something is going on. Something is going on right there that's okay with everyone. That's what I'm picking up. See how he backs out?
Do you think he was back? Debbie, do you think he's backing out because he's aware that there is a camera, or is it just because he decided to walk out backwards?
No, not at all. And usually when someone's walking out backwards like that, that's like a friendly gesture. That's like a familiarity gesture. It's not like I'm kicking you out and good riddance and slamming the door behind you. Look how the door is being closed. And look how he's walking out. Yeah. So that is what's striking to me. That's what I'm picking up.
And Debbie, one of the questions that was raised, and Joe might want to jump in on this as well. People were wondering why authorities because this is video from Los Angeles, why they wouldn't have released a video of them going in. And the consensus was either he went in a different way or he went in with the young girl and they don't want to show the young girl's face. Do you have any idea why they would only release this snippet of video potentially?
I think it's probably the only thing that they had that may have some clarity. I'm not sure if the entering ever existed, because if it did, why wouldn't you show that? But I'm very concerned about this. If you slow that up frame by frame, he is saying something to the person on the other side right there. He's saying something to the person on the other side of the door at that moment.
Joe, Joe, I'm sorry, Debbie. Joe, do you have any thoughts on why this is the only snippet of video, why they might not have shown them walking in together?
Well, the only thing I can think of as a reason is you have to be very careful when you have a victim of a sexual assault, specifically a 9-year-old, right? We have rape shield laws and everything else that goes along with it. Yes, they could try to blur out her face. There could have been something else within that photo that would be able to identify either her or the exact location, right? Because you can't even give up the location. You can't say the address even, because once again, you're giving up the identity of a sex crime victim, and that becomes a huge problem for you in a lawsuit. So, that's the only way I could think of. But I think a better question to ask is, why didn't this get released when this event happened? Apparently, this wasn't released by the LAPD until this case came up as a connection case. So that could be, I think, a better question, because if you have an assault of a young girl, I think that was something that needed to be in a press release immediately, and having some TV and news crews on that case.
Yeah, and that question came up as well. And the answer that investigators came up with Thursday night was either it was, and it just wasn't connected to this, and it was aired, although people don't think that's the case, or there's sadly too many similar cases in Los Angeles County, because it's such a massive county with a lot of crime, that they kind of just slip through the cracks. But that's a great question to be asking.
Yeah,
Becky
the
Ireland
age is the big thing.
Say again.
The age of the victim is the biggest thing for me at that one. We don't know for sure, but there is a lot of chatter of that the victim is 9 in that case in LA.
Yeah. And that is understandable then. Becky Ireland, hello to SGS from Ohio, followed here by Heidi Nicer from Syracuse, New York. Small Joel factoid: I lived in Manlius outside of Syracuse for about 2 years of my life. Never saw so much snow in my lifetime. I'm just curious, Barbara Ray Venter, you're not an investigator, you're an attorney, but when you're watching this video and you know that this woman was murdered and this is who they believe is their suspect, what is calculating in your mind? What are you looking at? What are you thinking about?
Well, I was wondering about the backing out. I guess I would have come, since I'm not a detective, I would have come to the conclusion that he was aware of a camera and didn't want his face to be seen. I was also wondering, it looks like the arm that you can see is in fact a very young arm. So it is kind of interesting that this young victim is basically ushering him out. So it's kind of a strange scenario there. And I guess I also had the question of, why is there not any kind of video of him going in? Did he maybe go in through a window or something else, instead of going through a door where there might be a camera?
So the obvious, most recent news is this walk, and Joe Jacklone, being the consummate law enforcement officer that he is, even took a ride down there, and obviously not looking. He wasn't on the trail like most people. He was looking for exit routes, escape routes. It's interesting. Joe, two things. What was the mood at the walk like? I assume it was somber, but can you just kind of, paint the picture of what the scene was like there? We saw the video, but what was the emotion like?
Yeah, the emotion, it was almost as if like a wet blanket is thrown on you when you're in there in the crowd, right? Originally it was cool in the morning, and people were starting to, mull around and gather around. And I said, you know what, now would be a good time to take the walk on the trail when nobody was around, because I didn't want to make myself a pest, right? You're there. I don't want to make it look like I'm trying to, do something that I'm not supposed to be doing. So I figured I would just take the trail, take a look, and walk for a bit. To answer Debbie's question, it is a gravel trail, and unfortunately, I mean, even now, like I have these AirPods in, they're noise canceling. I mean, they really work. You don't hear a lot of things in the background with these things on, and it's I don't know if Rachel had those on. I'm assuming that she was listening to some sort of music. That could be a potential problem for say. And it happened later on in the afternoon. I believe it was. I was there early in the morning where the sun was in a different location. But if you could see from the video the different shadows and things that are falling, and as you know, right, you're in the sunlight, and then all of a sudden you're under the shade. You take sometimes your eyes a little bit to adjust to it. And the issue that there's some deep culverts on each side too. From when the rain and the heavy rain and stuff like that, and you can see that somebody wouldn't be able to even pop out there. But there were some places where you can easily hide, and there's lots of brush and bramble and those kind of things. And it just gives you, that sense. Like I said, there's a couple of people. But here's an interesting thing: if you watch it long enough, and we're not going to have enough time to watch it because the video's kind of long. I actually spooked a couple of ladies because I went investigating this path out to the street, and as I came back, they didn't even see me come out. And they said, and the woman like jumped. So I was like, yeesh. So I had to be real careful about that. It was either I said, I'm sorry about the face, can't do anything about that, kind of thing. I'm sorry, kind of thing. But just to try to make light of it. But you have to remember, if you do this, people are on edge, right? They're on edge, even though there's cops just about everywhere. People are really spooked, and I think it's going to really affect that trail for a long time.
Yeah, and Joe, you tweeted something interesting, and actually put out a YouTube short on this, and I quoted you last week. And you wrote, if you plan the attack, you needed to plan an escape. So that's what you were looking for. But you said something that day about if you headed in one direction, you were just going basically into the wilderness, but the other direction led out to a cul-de-sac. So, Joe, I'm assuming by now investigators have hit every home there to check for Ring cameras and try to, see if any of the video matched the description of what they have from the LA camera, right? They would have done that by now.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure they did that. And I threw that out there, like I said, a while back, so that it's just a case they might have forgotten. Maybe somebody sees that and says, hey, you know what, maybe we better do that, right? Kind of thing. Because if you look at the trail on a map, and I did this before I went down, right? And I know we have a lot of true crime sleuthers out there, and I always try to encourage them to do certain things, like just go to the Google Maps and just look at the location and say, if I was going to do something terrible like this, where would I escape from, right? How would I get out of this? And if you look at it, the trail goes to a place. I mean, there's in that video, you can see there's houses within a rock's throw, right? I mean, you can, those are locations where you say, I can't hide here because there's people in the backyard that can see me, right? But if you go a little bit further, I mean, it's like a forest, and it's very dense. So there are a lot of little avenues on this. But there was that one place that I like a lot, and you'll see it in the video if you watch long enough. And it's a small path that's actually beaten down. And when you come out, there's one of those. I think it's a cell tower. It says no trespassing and stuff like that, but it leads to a service road. So if this person had a vehicle or a bicycle or anything like that, it would be the perfect place to go and drive right out of there, and nobody would even know the better, because like I said, there's locations where there are houses and cars, so I don't think anybody would even kind of give it a second thought.
And the COE will continue to play it as we go. But I want to get this question in again from Exquisite, and this is to you, Debbie Ramsey. Seeing the hand close the door behind him, leaving the home in LA, could a sketch be made of his face? So this is what we're looking at here, and I'm going to get rid of this comment so these are the still images. In your experience, could you get a solid sketch artist so we can get some sort of image of the front of his face? Because right now it's not the best in terms of being a descriptor for people who are trying to help law enforcement. Your thoughts? Can a sketch be made of this guy?
Well, before I answer that, I would like to make this comment that oftentimes what goes on behind the scene, detectives are not making the final decision of what will be released, what will not be released. There's a legal department that is making those decisions for them. So the question of why they did not release the video of the entry, oftentimes in Baltimore, we don't have DAs, we have state's attorneys. So the prosecutors, they work with the law department. So I wouldn't be surprised if the law department and the state's attorney for Harford County made those decisions. The other thing I would like to say about the trail is that, after, when you're working on cases like this, sometimes I would say, you know what, I'm kind of jaded. So this is how my mind works. So even though her body was found there, doesn't mean that the act was committed there. And as Joe was saying, the forestry is very dense. If I were going to do harm to someone and it was premeditated, or let's say if I was a hit person, I don't know, and that this is where they where they frequent, so it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for her body to be found out. I wouldn't be surprised if if the act was committed someplace else and was taken there for the same reason. But Joe was talking about the service road. There should be tire tracks or something. So she could have very well have been abducted someplace else, and the act of her demise was committed someplace else. And if I were of that mindset, I would want less work, because now once I have, if it was not random, if it was premeditated, now that I have given myself an extra homework assignment, now I have to have an escape route. That doesn't follow suit with that kind of mindset. If it were premeditated, if it were random, and she was just a target of opportunity, oftentimes it's kind of messy. That crime scene can be kind of messy. So I'm kind of like leaning towards it's a possibility the act was committed someplace else. Least amount of moving parts. She was placed there. I would like to see what the crime scene looked like. Did like there was a struggle? If she's in that type of physical shape and doing some regular, you can find some defensive markings on her fingernails, her clothing, something, her hair, the foliage around her. Something should be really out of place that there was a struggle. I cannot see anybody. And if it were random, wasn't that kind of, shouldn't be kind of messy? So if they're not releasing that information, maybe the legal department and the state's attorney's office, they have their way of looking at it through the eye of a legal lens, and not to jeopardize the investigation and or falsely accuse someone, or to have someone deliberately profile in the event someone says that a certain type of person that fits his profile was in the area. So they have to be very, very careful about that. I'm not sure if, I'm not 100% certain that the act was committed where they said it was. It seemed like it was very sterile and very sanitized, clean, my understanding.
So Detective Ramsey saying that maybe the body was placed there. The sister, Rebecca, who's been a little bit vocal, which is understandable, she posted on Facebook and left a clue here. She said this was not an accidental death and she did not go willingly. She deserves a funeral worthy of her beauty. She did not go willingly is the key to that sentence, Joe, Jacklone, and Barbara. I'm coming back to you, but since Debbie raised this question, um, we don't know what we don't know, and authorities have been very tight-lipped. There was a person originally who talked about finding the body and basically, in so many words, said half her face was missing, which would lead you to believe it was a very messy, horrific crime scene. But police tamped down on that. The sheriff's office tamped down on that. But with what you know and your long history in law enforcement, do you believe what Detective Ramsey believes, that maybe her body was placed there after the crime?
Well, listen, anything's possible, but the issue is that her car was parked in that small parking lot that you see. It only fits about 15 or 20 cars, and you would be right out in the open. So if anybody, would be parking the car, there are a whole bunch of houses that they could have had surveillance. I mean, there are townhomes right overlooking the property. As a matter of fact, when I was there for the ceremony, there were people on their balconies watching it. That's how close they were. So anybody who was parking her car, plus the fact that you might have a chance of leaving, Barbara would definitely be able to answer this better. The touch DNA, part of this, the steering wheel and all the other stuff that would all be done. And I'm sure law enforcement is going to do that anyways. But I believe that you see that there's the apartments I'm talking about, and that's the parking lot. It only fits about, like I said, about 20 cars there. So, and you're out in the open, so you're you would be exposed in that avenue if you were trying to do something like this. So I think that she was attacked on the path for that reason. And I mean, we know this guy's transient, right? So we don't know exactly, where he's been laying his head. Who knows? He could be sleeping in the park. I mean, that place is huge. So the deal is he knows that it exists, right? Because many of us, including myself, never even heard of this trail before this event happened. So he's there in this trail, whatever, doing his stalking or hunting, whatever you want to refer to it, looking for a potential victim. So, he's got some ties maybe to that area. It's just something that I would just hope for as an investigator.
And the COE, the chief of everything, Joe Jacklone mentions the condominiums, and there you see him. She is fast as lightning, even as she prepares 3 young kids to go off to school tomorrow. Thank God. Thank God that day is almost here. Love my kids, by the way, but it's time to go to school. This question is for Joe from Teresa Dunn, but we're going to throw it over to Barbara Ray Venter. And I have to be honest, I don't fully understand this question, but that doesn't mean much because I'm a little slow. But since he's in CODIS, Barbara, does this mean his DNA has only been entered twice? Your response?
Well, certainly it's presumably been entered from the crime in LA. It's now been entered from the crime in Maryland, but there's no way of knowing whether it might have. Well, I guess the answer would have to be it's only been entered twice. I have a quick question for Joe, if I may. So, Joe, you mentioned there's a cell tower sitting right there, and presumably the home where the rape took place has a router. Can't you compare, what's tripped on the cell tower versus what's in the home's router to look for a number?
That's a great question, but you have to be connected to the Wi-Fi, right? So if he is a stranger with that 9-year-old, then there's a likelihood that his cell phone wouldn't have connected to the Wi-Fi. Now, if he knows the victim, there's a whole other story, right? So you might have had, maybe it could be a friend of the family or something, who knows? And, you've done that, right? You go to somebody's house, hey, what's the Wi-Fi? I have to download something, and you connect them, and you forget, to forget the network, right? When you go to and you hit that button, and the next time you walk in that house, you might not even realize it, but you connected to that router. And I always tell law enforcement when I do my training, when you're doing your search warrants, take the router. That's actually the most important piece of information that you need in that house, because every phone, like you were saying, Barbara, everything that in the world has been connected to that device, and you don't know what kind of device you're actually looking for. So you can take a look at it and then match up everybody's cell phone, see if there's somebody who doesn't exist, right? We have an approximate time, and we have some different, avenues that we can actually look down and kind of get granular into where and when this could have happened. But yes, and just in that the whole CODIS question, we know there's several databases within CODIS, but all crime scenes that have DNA that we don't know who the suspect in is put in what they call the forensic database, or just for layman's term, it's the unknown database, right? So the basic two of them are your known and unknown, and that's basically what happens. So you take the LA crime scene, you put it in the forensic database, and then they get the match when they put it up in Maryland, and it comes back to a hit in the unknown database. Still doesn't give you a name, right? But now this is how they connected the two crimes.
Best guess, better community, as I like to say. Heather Wren, welcoming Debbie Ramsey. She gave the old Baltimore Hun. Great to see fine young ladies on this show. It's always interesting to hear the colloquialisms from the different parts of this country. Very important question here. Hey, STS, is it too late to buy merchandise for your store to support Maui? It is not. I have just made an executive decision that any merchandise bought at the store through Thursday evening of this week will be donated to Maui. We had the head of the CEO of the Hawaii Community Foundation. They are the largest, most respected nonprofit in Hawaii. We gave money from last week's show to them and money from last night's show, plus whatever merchandise you guys buy, and there's special STS Nation Loves Maui shirts in the store right now. Maybe the COE will put up the link to the store. You can find it on the YouTube page. You can find it on our Instagram page at Surviving the Survivor. They're pretty nifty shirts, too. I like them. And some mugs. And all that money is going to go to Maui and the residents there. This comment from Hunting DNA, superhero Barbara Ray Venter, a time 100 person, and we are fortunate to have her on our show. Betty Dawson saying, wow, Barbara, thank you for all you do and have done. Impressive. Yes, it is. So the family spokesperson came out, Debbie Ramsey. His name is Joe Murtha. He says that there's a sense of hope now that there's a potential suspect. Here's the exact quote. There's a sense of encouragement that justice will ultimately be served and that this person will be brought to justice as a result of the work by the Harford County Sheriff's Office. Joe Jacklone handles cold cases, but Debbie Ramsey, do you think they're going to let it get to that stage, or will the Harford Sheriff's Office crack this case in due time?
I would look at it in two possible scenarios. If it were random, why her? Because it seemed like that was a trail well traveled and women take that route. So if it was random, what was it about her that the assailant felt that she would be his victim or her victim? Okay. If it was a mastermind behind it where there was some thought put into this, the scope opens up into not so much a larger circle, but a more tighter circle. Because if it's a mastermind, then this was deliberate. And I would either look at it, what kind of relationship she's had, who had some type of, disagreement with her, and I would go down that road. But for right now, I would have to go down both roads. And if it was random, why her? What was being telegraphed to the assailant that she would make the perfect victim and have less, less questions about why her? So I want to know why her, because she wasn't the only woman on that trail. And as Joe was saying earlier, he almost spoke to other women that didn't even see or hear him until they were right on top. Now, let's just say Joe just had, thank goodness he's well adjusted. You look like you're well adjusted, Joe. So thank goodness you're well adjusted. But let's say that you were not a well person, or you had a gripe with somebody, and boom, there they are. And oftentimes, we hear about the violence in Baltimore. A lot of it has to do is up close and personal, to be quite honest. and people have a gripe with one another, and they no longer believe in the criminal justice system. So they become vigilantes, and they want to take matters to their own hand. I want to know, was she okay with everyone? Did anyone have a gripe with her? Because there was a time when I was in the police department, there was a larger degree of people believing in the criminal justice system. I had taken many reports where it could have had a police report had not been reported, it could have gone south really quick. And I think that's what's going on now. And we just have to be mindful about how people view the criminal justice system. Do you think you can get some fairness? I had a case actually where there was a drive-by shooting. And when I got the call, got in the house, the victim saying, hey, I know exactly who did it. They got a gripe with me. I'm going after them. And I had to kind of like talk them off the ledge. I said, look, would you just please give me an opportunity to investigate this? And if it's who you say you are, would you just give me an opportunity? And if I fall short, then you do what you have to do. Well, fortunately, it went to court and it was in his favor. So I use that as an example of then and now. And I'm still of the mindset that this particular case, it has all the outward appearances as somebody had an issue with her. I really do. I'm leaning towards that, but I also have to look at, it could be a random act. If it was a random act, oftentimes that's kind of messy, and the culprit is pretty much seized in a relatively amount of time that fits the energy that went towards hurting someone like this. So it just seems like there's a mastermind somewhere in this case, and maybe more than one. Could be a co-conspiracy. Could be more than one. Could be more than one person.
And that's come up too. And I love what Detective Ramsey is saying, because we all sort of assume one thing now, that this is a random act, and it was, she didn't know this guy. But Detective Ramsey, I think, is cautioning us that that they're still investigating to be done here. Barbara Ray Venter from I Am Not T-Pain, big friend of the show. Question: genetic genealogy has been used a lot to solve cold cases and current crimes. You think law enforcement is using it right now to find this suspect? Followed up by Sally Vella, who says they should do familial DNA in any case they take DNA. Your response, Barbara?
So I'll answer the second one first. The familial DNA question depends on state law as to whether or not they can do familial DNA. I don't think that Maryland is one of the states where familial DNA testing is allowed, but I do not know that for sure. I would assume that if there is sufficient DNA, that yes, investigative genetic genealogy probably is being worked on. However, there's a couple of things here. One is the suspect looks like he is Hispanic. Hispanic cases are much more difficult to work on than those involving white suspects like Kohberger. Kohberger probably took about 6 to 8 weeks, which is actually pretty fast. This is not like NCIS where you get results immediately. It can take quite a lot of time to work on a case. So it's possible that it's being worked on, but it could take quite a long time to solve a case like this.
And Barbara, can you just kind of expand on the difficulty of Hispanic suspects? Why is it so much harder?
The traditional databases that are, well, the ones that are used, GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, the bulk of the people who have done DNA testing or uploaded to GEDmatch, they're white. 80% of those databases are white. The percentage of people in those databases who are of Hispanic ancestry is really fairly small. And so it makes it just a lot more difficult to then work on the cases because you don't get very many matches. So whereas if you might go and test, you might get 5,000, 6,000 matches. Somebody who is Hispanic may get 500 or 600 matches or even less. I have cases where I've only got 6 or 7 matches. So it's a very different problem. And then, of course, depending on whether they've been in the US for a long time or their family is only recently, say, from Mexico, If you can get into the Mexican databases, and some of them are just very, very good. In fact, the records are probably better than a lot of the records here. If they're in a region where good church records were kept, then you have a better chance in it trying to solve them. But quite often, people are not from those regions. They're from more rural areas, and they've not been in the US for very long. So it then makes it much more difficult to try and build family trees, which is, of course, what we're trying to do.
Well, very fascinating. I had no idea. Now I do because of our best guest, Barbara Ray Venter. Barbara, this question came up on the last show, and I just love for you to address it quickly. Jody Johnston, is anyone opposed to getting a DNA sample of everyone at birth? We got a lot of privacy laws in this country. Barbara, your response?
Actually, we do that. Since about sometime in the mid-70s, every newborn baby is tested for PKU, phenylketonuria, and those samples are actually still around. Most they're at the state level, and so most states still have those samples. And of course, people are now suddenly perking up and wondering what's going on with those. There was actually a case that I worked on where we actually did use one of those state databases to confirm the identity of some unidentified remains when I had identified who we thought it was. So that data is available, but access to it varies by state. And whether or not it will stay there or not is another question. Of course, it's only for people then born in the mid to late 70s. So we're looking at people who were, 45 years old or older, or younger, excuse me.
Yeah, and this suspect is in his early 20s, they say. Ketchup is a big part of the STS community, listening while walking my dog. And Debbie Ramsey would say, make sure you only have one earbud in, Ketchup. Take care of yourself. A petite woman walking her dog as dusk is settling in. So be careful out there. It's what we're talking about here. Joe Jackalone, this is kind of a real life whodunit in real time. You guys are the best. NYPD, Baltimore. You guys are the guys that deal with these sorts of crimes all the time. Pull back the proverbial curtain. What's going on in the sheriff's office right now as they try to look for this guy? Is this a 24/7 operation? How often are they meeting? What are they talking about? How are they going to find this guy?
Well, this is actually what some of the detectives actually live for. This is where some of them really shine, right? The hunting for a known suspect, or even in this case, an unknown suspect, where you have at least the DNA and some photographs or video surveillance of the guy. And now this is where you put all your skills to the test. And this is where investigators often shine. I don't know if they're doing 24 hours because we're dealing with a much smaller department, and you have to be able to have fresh set of eyes and bodies to take care of these things. But I think that they have contacted their local partners in Customs, Border Patrol, the FBI. I'm sure is involved in this now. U.S. Marshals, right? We have a lot of assets to bear on this thing. We want to just they have to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Right? This guy is struck twice already. We're having we have a serial case on our hands. They got to stop it now. So this is something that needs to be done right now. So I think the budget is going to get blown out of the water for this one with the overtime, and it's going to be worth every penny of it once they get this guy off the street.
Yeah, and someone said they couldn't remember a recent homicide in Harford County, and they've got 10 investigators. That's a large ratio relative to the sheriff's office. Detective Ramsey, to you from Heather Wren, is anybody thinking this guy could actually be from Maryland and not LA? I mean, just because he committed the crime back on March 26th in LA first doesn't mean he's necessary from there. It seems he knew these trails. I assume you're going to tell us you got to keep all possibilities open, Detective Ramsey, that maybe he is from Maryland.
Yeah. And also I would use an analogy as a, like I say, a bomb threat. Just because you might find one explosive device doesn't mean it's not another. So even though a lot of attention is given to this one person, in the meantime, in between time, I would want to interview everyone in those townhouses that Joe was showing that had a view of the crime scene or where the body was found. while we are looking at that one person, I will also spend a lot of time interviewing every person in all those townhouses, and then you're gonna get a profile. Then you're gonna get you get an understanding of people. We're assuming that everybody is A-OK and well adjusted. I would want to know which window out of all those townhouses and condos had the best view. And let's just say you're not a healthy person and you see this person every day or whatever their routine was, and you're not altogether too well. I want to know which window had the best view of that particular trail and talk to everyone in that building. And believe it or not, someone has seen somebody, they didn't connect it. And we as investigators, we understand the least little insignificant information can be the biggest breakthrough. So not to eliminate the possibility of someone may have seen or heard something and didn't connect the dots, like Jill was saying, you got cars parked there. Did someone look out and saw a trunk open for no apparent reason? Hey, that car trunk is open. I wonder why. And didn't think anything else about it. Or maybe they went away and not even aware of this incident. Were you here? Were you at work? Would you have seen something, heard something? Yeah, my dog, for some reason, they normally don't bark. And for some reason, my dog was barking a lot around that time. What time did it happen? So I will look at this like a bomb threat. You find the one bomb. Let's keep going.
That's an interesting.
Yeah. Let's keep going, okay? Because just because you find that one thing that you think is the all in all, oftentimes, no. We keep going and we do a thorough search. So I would like to talk to everyone in that building. Just to see.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy about the bombs. And interesting to hear about the trunk being open, because something that seems very benign to someone living there may not have been. So I'm sure they're canvassing the area. Joe Jacklone, back to you. And this is toes a difficult line because you don't want to get, and because there's a couple of comments in a row here into victim shaming or blaming the victim. But do you think this guy was watching Rachel for a long time? Do you believe this was more of a crime of opportunity? And then over here, we know she was on dating apps. The comment is, what if she met up with him for some reason? We know she was a member, I believe it's Planet Fitness, a big fitness sort of fanatic. And there she is, Rachel Morin, the mom of 5. Joe, right now, are they going back and looking at video from Planet Fitness? I'm sure they've done this already, but cross-referencing that video against the March 26 LA video to see maybe this guy is a member of the gym. Maybe he does live in the area. Maybe he's not from LA. Are all these avenues being tracked down right now and looked at?
Well, you hope so, right? I mean, this is investigation 101 kind of thing, right? So where everywhere she was, right, you try to piece it together hours before the crime happened, piece together every location she's been to. There's also a tavern or a pub there. There's a couple of commercial places that are not far from that parking lot. So if somebody walked by or, they drove by, they might have been able to pick something up with video surveillance too. These are a lot of things that we don't know the answers to. And as you know, law enforcement doesn't tell you anything in regards to this, because we already had somebody in there who was already telling the media about certain things about the crime scene. And the police were pretty much unequivocal about that this guy was never at the scene. So, to me, that's kind of foretelling. I know people are saying, well, they were just trying to discount what he was saying because they didn't want to blow the investigation. And I said, the cat was already out of the bag. At that point, there's no even reason to even pay this guy any attention. So the issue that comes down to is, like Debbie said, talking to people is always the detective's number one thing, right? It's their number one skill. They got to know how to talk to people. And then specifically, they need to know how to ask the right questions, because what's unusual to me might not be unusual to somebody else. So, this is where you have to deal with it. And, one thing I haven't seen yet, and I might have missed it, is like a Crime Stoppers reward, right? Putting out some money out on the street, going into the communities where this guy could have lived or laid his head down and saying, passing posters around with his photo on it from LA saying, do you recognize this? I mean, he has a specific haircut, right? It's very close to the side. He's got the wave over. He has identifying features. I don't see any tattoos or scars, but it's a doorbell cam. It's not the greatest, but there could have been some other features like his gait, how he walks, all these other things that you and I might not think of it, but it could be a big clue if you show a witness and say, oh, I know that guy. I see how he walks. He's got that little bit of a limp or whatever it may be, right? I mean, that's basically what you're doing here. You're trying to pull a rabbit out of the hat, but the only way you pull that rabbit out of the hat is you go out there into these communities and start passing these pictures around and posters. Like I said, I hope they're doing that, but I don't know. I haven't really heard much in that line of thinking.
Let's hope they're doing that. Coco and Kittens, back to you, Detective Ramsey, and then we're going to get back to Barbara Ray Venter. I'm sure they're checking every social media hit she had leading up to her murder. If you have a public profile, it's very easy for a stalker to follow you physically. Can you just the majority of STS Nation is female. Do you have a cautionary word to the women watching about social media? It's a lot of fun. People are on it all day long, but it can be dangerous, right, Detective Ramsey?
Yeah, and I was just going to bring that point up because social media, it has a double-edged sword, and maybe it has a double-edged sword and a prong at the end of it too. But I think we, as this generation, kind of are lax with protecting their identity and being influencers or followers is very tempting to just put yourself out there and what you do, what you like, because you want people to like you, you want people to follow you, you want to be an influencer. So you're almost marketing yourself. And when you marketing yourself, that lands on, it's like the dew falling from the air. It's going to land on everything and everyone that you would like to have an appealing relationship with, but also there's no way you can safeguard or select who it is that you are trying to attract. And also, let's be clear, there are lots of ways how people can clone your cell phone these days, legally and illegally, without your knowledge. So, I mean, today's technology, your privacy, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and then if you are putting yourself out there deliberately, how are you going to be mindful enough to say, I'm going to be selective? You can't, because once it's out there on the internet, it's out there. And if you're giving up more information about yourself, where you live, what you like to do, what gym you go to, who you know, who's following you, all those things gets into the equation. And to decipher that and to separate that, it's almost like separating scrambled eggs at this point. So there's so much information that someone has voluntarily given of themselves that it wouldn't be that difficult for someone to locate you or to know what your habits are. And I would just say to women, and I'm going to say this, and it's not a sexist remark. However, when we are out there walking and jogging, believe it or not, how we are dressed, if someone is looking at us, not as we have the right to dress and be comfortable as we choose to be. However, we have to take into consideration realistically that it may be something about my attire that may draw someone to me who may not be healthy enough to appreciate my independence and how I want to present myself. So there's some things we don't talk about as women. That, yeah, and I have the right to wear what I want. Yeah, you do, we do, and I do. And however, the arena that we put ourselves in, we cannot not think about that. It may be like 1% of the consideration. When I go out and I'm a golfer, what I like to wear depending upon the temperature. I have to, I as a woman, I try to consider my comfort and how I am exposing myself at the same time. That's just being realistic. And I guess that's the police detective in me, that I have to, roll back some of the things that I would like to wear, because golf is mainly like a male sport. So I'm very mindful of that. So I think too oftentimes we as women, we recognize our rights and our ability to express ourselves as we should. However, we also must take into account, if we're putting ourselves out there in the social media arena, and we're just putting out all kinds of information about ourselves, I think that has to be a consideration. Not to tell people what to do, what not to do, how they want to appear, but today's climate, you really have to think about things like that. And that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. Detective Ramsey, Chelsea Whitaker wants to know, what do you mean by cloning a cell phone?
Well, there are technologies out there where someone can take your phone and actually clone it and have a duplicate, and they will be able to, all your phone calls, all your texts, they can, and Barbara may be able to expound upon this a little bit, but generally speaking, someone could find a way to take your cell phone and clone it. And let me just say this. As a detective, that's what we used to do when we were working undercover cases. That technology has been around for a very, very long time. And we would actually, if we had a target, we would seek a judge's authority to take this information and literally have it cloned. And we can actually hear all the conversations. But we had to prove that this person that we are targeting warrants that type of the civil rights, if you will, to be looked at, or So I'm pretty sure, and that was like 30 years ago when we were doing that. When cell phones and remember the cell phones that first came out, like the Nextel, they were like a brick. They were like really heavy, like 10 pounds you carry around. So we had a technology about 25, 30 years ago. So I would not be surprised that the average person would be able, I wouldn't be surprised there's an app out there that someone on the dark side of the internet, that they can get an app and they get your phone and they can follow you and you don't even know it. They can hear your conversations. They can see all your texts. And so that technology is out there.
Well, someone has all my photos. I got hacked on Facebook and I can't get back in. It's crazy, and there's no one to call. You can't call Mr. Facebook. So it's a real problem. I've had to scan my license and still can't get back onto Facebook over a week later. Dressage gal for Barbara Ray Venter. This came up last week that possibly he's military. They're going on the fact that there's military bases not far away in Maryland and not far away in LA from where this happened. Also his haircut. So possibly he's military on leave when he was in LA, then returned to Maryland. The question that came up last week, Barbara Ray Venter, do they, if you enlist, do they have your DNA? Could they go to a military DNA database, or is that off limits because of privacy concerns? Before you answer that, Barbara Ray Venter, an important thing to address from Tali. Joel, I'm waiting for the day you would say Tali from Israel, a friend of the show. Tali, it goes without saying, you're a huge friend of the show. You're from the homeland, the Holy Land. So we welcome you. But Barbara Ray Venter, what about taking DNA from enlisted people? Is that something that happens, DNA samples?
Yes, it is, for a very good reason. If they got killed in action, then you have to be able to identify them. So actually, everybody who enlists in the military, DNA is taken from them. I do not believe that database is generally accessible, but I do not know that for sure.
And Barbara, you said something at the beginning, which I think I heard correctly, about the amount of DNA. Is that important in terms of building the familial tree? Does there have to be a certain amount of good DNA to go ahead and do that?
So the operative word is good DNA. So quite often the DNA that you get from a crime scene is damaged. And so if it's damaged, then you're going to probably need more of it. Just in the short time since the Golden State Killer case, though, the ability to work with smaller and smaller amounts of DNA has improved, as has the ability to work with damaged DNA. So they've actually been, when we started out, you were typically told that you needed 200 nanograms of DNA. There've now been cases solved with 25 picograms, which is over 1,000-fold less. So, and now when we get a sample in, which is either damaged or it's only a small amount, we use different techniques. We can use what's called whole genome sequencing. So instead of just doing the traditional SNP array, which is what the direct-to-consumer companies use, you now actually can do whole genome sequencing. You can then use computer algorithms. If there are pieces of the DNA that are missing, you can then use the computer to fill in what it thinks is the missing DNA, so that you end up with theoretically a complete genome. I'd also actually like to comment on the use of Facebook and the amount of information that people put out there. The detective is making a very good point. We can actually build entire family trees from the information that people post on Facebook. In fact, people are concerned about their privacy with DNA. We don't use the DNA to find out who somebody is. We use Facebook and Instagram and all those other social media sites. That's how we solve our cases.
Wow. If anyone missed what she just said, Barbara Ray Venter, the godmother of investigative genetic genealogy, just said they use Facebook, not the DNA. So it's all out there. Thanks to Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and the rest. It's a weird world that we live in right now. Very, very strange world. And as a father of 3 young kids, I got to keep tabs on these kids.
You don't want to put pictures on Facebook. You really don't.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so many people just don't think about it. It boggles the mind. But Joe Jacklone, baby doll, big friend of the show, as is Tali from Israel. Does anybody on the panel think Rachel was, this is obviously a little speculative, but Joe's got a long history in law enforcement. Does anybody on the panel think Rachel was meeting someone at the park, or maybe she met at the park, somebody picked her up, then she was placed back at the park? Following up that comment is Mercy K. Placing her back at the park would be too much effort. I bet whoever it was met her there, maybe got mad to find out she was seriously dating someone else. Joe Jackalone, these are all possibilities. I assume all things that law enforcement is looking at. But again, it sounds like police are saying that they likely didn't know each other. Police calling the incident a potentially random act of violence. That is a quote. What say you, Joe?
Well, one thing we know about police departments, they rarely will come out and say we have a stranger type case going out, right? They always want to tell you that this is somebody that the suspect and the victim know one another. There's no need to be alarmed. And on one of the other TV shows, when I was talking about this, I said, you listen to what the police say and then you watch what they do. So they came out and said, we believe, anything's possible basically, but they went out and bought a $20,000 ATV for patrol. They stepped up patrols. They had police cars at the beginning of the trail, the end of the trail. They had cops walking the trail. So to me, that was all pointing in the direction of a stranger type case, right? And the other thing that we don't know about, and Debbie will probably, corroborate this kind of thing. When you see stranger cases, you often see like the sexual assault part of it. Right? We don't know exactly what happened. We don't know where the DNA came from. It could be she scratched them. It could have come from underneath her fingernails. It could have been a sexual assault. These things are all we don't know. Right? So there are other avenues of DNA could have been found. Could maybe sweat, saliva, maybe he bit her or kissed her, right? I mean, there could be so many different things that they could be looking at in this thing. But I don't believe that she had any interaction with him, or if she did have an interaction with him, it was along the trail. And part of the investigation would be to go back into your archives and look to see if there was any investigative report that somebody said, listen, there was this weird guy in the park. He was following me around. See if you have similar cases like that, and maybe go back and revisit those people and talk to them again. Show them the photo from the still from the LA scene, and maybe you get lucky that way, right? So that's just something that I think investigators would have done by now, for sure.
There's so many tentacles to this, and got to let the guests go. Eventually, we'll go a few more things to get to, and then we'll start to wrap it up. This is interesting, Joe. I'm going to come right back to you on this. From Jill H. Please tell me why the girl in LA back on March 26 did not give a face composite. No one will address that point. As Joe said, she's 9 years old. But that doesn't mean a 9-year-old couldn't give a description of a potential suspect. Why no sketch, in your opinion?
Well, the only thing I can think of is that it was such a traumatic situation that happened with her that they were afraid of maybe causing more psychological damage to her. We don't know exactly for sure what happened to her, but you're dealing with a 9-year-old. I mean, I've had instances of adults go through something as similar trauma and still couldn't tell you what the person looked like. So, listen, would that case be worthy of going back and maybe re-interviewing? And those, I would have think that was already done, specifically with the pictures and now what's happened in Maryland, that maybe something would spark somebody's memory on something. Any little tidbit, anything that they can help to try to track this guy down, it would be helpful.
Misdemeanor, Detective Ramsey, 1 second, we'll get right to you here. From Misdemeanor OG, keeping us all in check. Number one, we don't even know the murder weapon. Some people early on, it was reported to be a rock. We don't know that for sure. Number two, Occam's razor is usually correct. The simplest, not these ridiculous, complicated scenarios, is more likely. Detective Ramsey, please feel free to bring up what you're going to ask. But I was going to ask you, she was reportedly found nude, and we don't know if the clothing was there or not. But does that tell you for sure it was some sort of sexual assault?
Yeah, what I was going to say, I want to talk about the composite and the information that the police is putting out. We don't do that. We do that deliberately, not put out everything because we know the assailant or the suspect is watching and listening and taking notes. They may even be watching this show. They are deliberately looking at any type of public information about this case. And if there was a composite, we don't know if the 9-year-old did not put a composite out, because if you put a composite out, people are apt to change their appearance. So we would not want to give out that kind of information. I wouldn't be surprised if the police has that information, but they cannot put it out. You can't put everything out in the public because that's going to jeopardize the case. And you want to keep everything held close to the chest. But getting back to Baby Doll, that's the tree I would be barking up with Baby Doll, the scenario that they put out there. So, we have to be mindful everything is not transparent and for the right reason, and to make sure that when we do zoom in on a suspect, that we are very confident that we are not going to falsely accuse someone, and that we feel confident that we are barking up the right tree. So that was the point that I just wanted to make. What goes on behind the scenes with investigators. We choose what we want to put out there, and sometimes we put out false information in. Just for somebody else, yeah.
Detective Ramsey, I want to come back to you on this as well, and I promise we'll start to wrap up. But the boyfriend, upon hearing the news about the suspect on Facebook, once again wrote, "I hope they find this scum of the earth." Now, the boyfriend, his name is Richard Tobin. He has a rap sheet. He has 2 arrests for second-degree assault, separate arrests for violating restraining orders, malicious destruction of property, disorderly intoxication, a fugitive from justice. So when this case broke, everyone pointed the finger at this guy. It appears it is not him. Do you have any words of caution about jumping to conclusions too early, especially we in the media, and maybe like blacklisting someone or portraying them as a potential killer before we know all the information? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, there's a saying, birds of a feather flock together. I would like to know how they met, what kind of relationship they had, who their friends were. Are they in the same type of culture? What's going on with that? I wonder how did they meet? And if if her walk of life is in total opposition than his, if she doesn't have a rap sheet, if she has never been arrested or accused of some of the crimes against persons as allegedly what the boyfriend has been, I was wondering how do your paths cross? What happened with that? How did that come about, and how this relationship started. So that's another avenue I would just try to take a deeper dive into.
Good point. Back to you, Barbara Ray Venter from Jane Ferguson. I have a problem with my relatives sharing their DNA on ancestry sites. By doing so, they violate my privacy. Your response, Barbara Ray Venter. We live in a country full of laws here in America, and people do not like their privacy violated. Is it kind of like going up and down escalator for you when it comes to this issue?
I would say that it's probably a case of the horse already left the barn quite a long time ago. Particularly if Jane Ferguson is white of Northern or Western European ancestry. There are so many of her relatives that have already uploaded their DNA that her being concerned about her immediate relatives is probably not really relevant. I would also say that it's a case of balancing. I have a right not to be raped and murdered. And if people uploading their DNA to GEDmatch or to Family Tree DNA can put some of these people behind bars, that would be really good. So I think it's important for people to not just look at their own situation, but also to think of what society in general could benefit from. And particularly for somebody whose DNA is already all over the place, it really doesn't make any difference that they're getting upset about their privacy being violated, because it really isn't. It already has been.
Hope, Ate, Fear. We know 5% of what's happening, followed by Michael Allen. The video is enough for a positive match to someone who knows him. The haircut alone. Joe Jacklone, kind of circling back to where I started with you. Curious what the sheriff's office is doing in terms of their coordination with the feds too. Last week, the investigators we had on said there's no doubt the FBI is involved because this crosses state lines, and U.S. Marshals, you mentioned. How did the Marshals operate? What are they doing? What kind of information are they running on right now?
Well, they're fugitive trackers, right? I mean, their job is to track down people. Sometimes people we don't know who they are yet. Go by travel manifests, you name it, planes, trains, automobiles, cabs, you name it. They put all that stuff together. And now today, in video connected world, try to place certain people at certain locations, at bus stops, train stations, and those airports could be a very important part of it. And all those federal partners, I'm sure, are involved in this. Like I said, we have a case now. It goes across the country. He's already done 2 to stop. If you think he's going to stop, I think you're mistaken. And that's why they need to find him. So they're going to pull out all the stops.
By the way, when you mentioned the router, Joe, I immediately thought of Brian Koberger. Everyone was wondering if his Wi-Fi linked up to the home at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. So it made me think of that when you said that's the single most important item to remove from the house. Carly Erickson, back to you, Joe, just to get your take, because Debbie gave hers. Rachel Morin, was reportedly found nude. Why would the suspect leave the victim naked? Humidity. I don't know if that means it was too hard to get the clothes back on, but what are your thoughts from a criminal perspective? Was this a sex assault, violent sex assault, and he just did what he did and left her there to die potentially?
Well, we don't know any of that for sure. And the other issue that comes down to is it's not beyond the realm that somebody would also stage something to look like a sexual assault too. So there are things that the law enforcement are trained to look for in certain cases. The medical examiner, of course, is going to play a big role in this too, to see if any DNA was left behind at that point too. But you have to keep an open mind. Like I said, we don't know for sure. We don't want to, you got to remember, we got family members out there watching this or listening to this stuff. We have to be really careful about what we say in regards to that, because we don't want to do more harm.
Excellent point. Grimmett, for Barbara Ray Venter, guest from another show, this came up last week, mentioned how identical twins share the same DNA, but I think the whole genome sequence can differentiate between the two. Barbara?
So certainly at conception, the identical twins have identical DNA, but as they are progressing through life, there are differences that start showing up. There are mutations that happen in one that don't happen in the other. We actually had a case where we had a suspect was an identical twin. Fortunately, we didn't have to get into doing the somewhat complicated DNA to sort out which twin it was, but it is possible. They also have different fingerprints. So if you happen to get fingerprint information, identical twins do not have identical fingerprints.
Fascinating. Detective Debbie Ramsey, we thank her. First time ever on the show, really insightful. You can tell she thinks like an investigator, covering all angles. She began her law enforcement career in 1982, which is hard to believe because she looks like she's not a day over 22. She was with the Baltimore Police Department in Maryland. She served for 12 years, rising through the ranks as a community policing officer, patrol officer, detective, and is now the founder and executive director of United Efforts, Inc., out of school time violence prevention program. She's also the recipient of the City of Baltimore Mayor's Citation for Splendid Community Service. So impressive. She's given back to her community. Sensory Combustion, member STS Nation. Detective Ramsey is incredible. What an amazing woman. Thanks for being here, Detective Ramsey. Your final thoughts on this case. Which way do you think things are headed now?
Well, I think it's a two-pronged. I think it's multiple investigations, and hopefully Harford County Sheriff Department will have one set that is focusing on random and another focusing on what I call like the mastermind, premeditated. And just keep in mind, people's haircuts can change just by putting that, how his hairstyle was, how his hair was cut. It can grow out. He can bleach it blonde. So all these identifying physical characteristics can be manipulated. And so I do not want to get hung up on that. But also, Barbara, I would like to say, I saw your cat in the background, and your cat, I would like to know your cat's opinion because they are very intuitive animals.
We love animals on STS. Go ahead, Barbara.
Well, I have no idea. That was Morgan Le Fay that you saw in the background. And Morgan is actually a very naughty kitten. I had some fruit stolen from my backyard this last weekend, and I went to get the camera footage to see who it was, and I discovered that she has this penchant for chewing through electrical cords. And I've replaced probably every electrical cord in the house, but she particularly likes apple cords. So anyway, I of course discovered that she had chewed through the camera feed. So I do not have any camera footage of whoever stripped my fruit trees.
Barbara Ray Venter, we are 6 degrees of separation. I have a boxer named Ethel Bug Johnson for some unknown reason. I gave her that name because that's not my last name, but she goes by Ethel. And Ethel is obsessed with hoses, and I've literally bought probably between 30 and 40 hoses for my backyard because Ethel thinks they are chew toys. So we live similar lives in that regard. For those who do not know, Barbara Ray Venter, a New Zealand-born American, a patent attorney. She broke the Joseph James D'Angelo Golden State Killer case wide open to help catch him. She was included in Time Magazine's Time 100 list of most influential people. In 2018, was recognized in Nature's 10, a list of people who mattered in science by the journal Nature. She's the author of I Know Who You Are, How an Amateur DNA Sleuth Unmasked the Golden State Killer and Changed Crime Fighting Forever. And we are proud to have her as a best guest from a IGG perspective. By the way, Barbara, do you ever, just because you're into this, do you ever just research on your own, even when you're not called, potentially on a case like this? Do you ever look into stuff just because you're interested?
It's not really possible because what I do, I need the DNA and the matches. So, I mean, if I see an interesting case, I might contact the detective to find out if they need assistance. But no, it's not really possible to do that.
By the way, Jody Johnston, I love that comment. I have a right not to be raped and murdered. Amen, Barbara. Followed by Tiff Knox. I have a right not to be raped or murdered. Boom. That's what we call a mic drop moment. Barbara Ray Venter, any mic drops before we let you go?
Well, I'm hoping that they are using IGG to round out this case, although it sounds like there are a lot of avenues that they can actually explore to try and solve this horrible case.
The man with the best hair in the business, Joseph Jacklone, retired NYPD sergeant, internationally recognized expert. He has extensive backgrounds in criminal investigations, held many prestigious positions in the NYPD, grew up right outside New York. There's no better police department than the NYPD. He's done it all. He's trained investigators around the world. 3-time guest speaker at CrimeCon. I hope I'm going to see you there this year, September 22nd. Joe is also the author of The Criminal Investigative Function. And Joe, what's the name of your recent book on the cold cases?
Yeah, the Cold Case Handbook.
Cold case. I like that title, Joe. Tali, friend of the show in Israel. Is it unusual, Joe, for a predator to go from sexually assaulting a child, a 9-year-old, and then change the MO and escalate it to a grown 37-year-old woman and kill her? This is the victimology. Are you looking at that? Are they looking at that? And your final thoughts?
Yeah, that's something that they'll look at for the profile purposes. Listen, I've seen a lot of crazy stuff in my career, so you learn never to say never and never say always, right? So anything can happen at any time, and it's just unfortunately we have most of the time it's just crimes of opportunity and something that we know that we need to do, and some people need to be locked away. So it's something that I think we'll find out that this person's been locked up before. And for minor offenses, and then because they don't take the DNA at that point. So I think they're gonna have this thing wrapped up in the next couple of weeks, is my guess.
Let's hope so. The STS chief, everything you're seeing it right there. I'm pretty sure Spanish-speaking media outlets and the COE, on top of everything else, speaks fluent Spanish, are sharing the story. The COE, a former network news correspondent as well, handling all the duties behind the scenes, which are much harder than what I do. A quick programming note: tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern time, we were scheduled to have Kerry Rawson, the daughter of Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK serial killer. Unfortunately, she has COVID, so you can send her wishes on Twitter if you'd like. She's laid up in bed, but we are still going to be on the Long Island serial killer. And we've got Joseph Scott Morgan and Cheryl Mack McCollum, 2 amazing guests to talk about the forensic side of things. And I'm looking for a third guest, so it's possible I'm going to call Joe Jackalone once again, because the guy knows everything about the Long Island serial killer. He's probably going to tell me to buzz off, which is one of our buzzwords. And then Wednesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, we're doing the case of Dr. Devin Hoover. And if you don't know who he is a Detroit neurosurgeon, murdered, shot twice in the back of the head, rolled up naked in a carpet in his mansion, a beautiful house in Detroit, in the attic. And the case is unsolved nearly 4 months later. We have the former Detroit police chief, James Craig. I hope I remember that correctly. But he is a former Detroit police chief. And he's got a lot of things to say about why this case has gone unsolved. So that is the next 2 days, 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, 12:30 p.m. for our global audience on Wednesday. And you can still buy Maui merchandise or any merchandise in the STS store. It is all going to the great people of Hawaii and Maui. Until then, love you, America. Love you, New York. Love you, California. Love you, Baltimore, Maryland, and Bel Air, Maryland, and everywhere in between. Guess, hang on one second.